With that, this is Megan Jones from ICEA welcoming you to today's Tech Showcase webinar brought to you by Palisade. This is the second of a three-part series on the at-risk software that Palisade is presenting this summer. The first, in case you missed it, is available on ICEA's YouTube channel and on the ICEAonline.com/tech showcase website. And the third in the series is coming up this day, August 13th. With us today from Palisade is Dr. Steve Van Drew to present part 2, Revisiting the Triangular and Pert three-point distributions. Steve?
Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everyone. Let's see if I can. As Megan said, this is the second part of a deep dive into input distribution selection. And as this is a tech showcase, I apologize in advance for maybe hitting a little too hard and being too upbeat, positive about all the features I'm going to show you for at risk, but that's the role that I'm playing this time. Instead of just trying to teach you about how to use three-point distributions, the triangular and Pert, I really am going to be emphasizing what at risk can do for you. I know there's competitive software available, Crystal Ball, for example, or the ACE Risk module that's part of Technology's ACID package. So I know those are available to you, but my emphasis is going to be on using at risk and its features to model either the triangular or the Pert distribution when you have three inputs. It's a good time to mention that as a three-part series, they were arranged in this order on purpose, and you don't need to have seen the June 19th distribution fitting of univariate data to follow along. I mean, it would have been nice if you were all able to participate in all three parts, but they're meant to be independent. But I need to emphasize before we begin the exercise I want to use to show you the features of at-risk and doing triangular and Pert today, that if I had data available, that's what I would go with. So that was why that was our first part in this three-part series. Was it's preferable to go with a distribution fit, but data needs to be present. And I think I'm not saying anything you don't know already as ICEA members, as cost estimators and analysts, that it's pretty rare in our business to have data for all cost elements that you might be modeling. So in part 2, what we're really beginning to say and acknowledge is the fact that we may very well not have data available for the cost estimate that we're modeling with risk and uncertainty. And that could lead us to simple three-point distributions. And I imagine you're all familiar with the triangular, because as a cost estimator myself, I'm very aware that that's one of the favorites in our community. Real easy to work with. You need 3 points, a min, a max, and a most likely. The same 3 points can be used for the Pert distributions, as I'll demonstrate. But with at risk, you have a number of different ways of kind of approaching having those same 3 points, how you can arrive at the distributions, model the syntax for it, if you will. I'm not going to pass judgment on this approach. Whether triangular Pert is better, it really depends on the situation and the value of the 3 points you're given, the experts you're working with. There is bias present, no doubt about it, and that's what part 3 will address. So I hope you come back on August 13th for the part 3 session on turning expert opinion into defensible distributions. But our focus this time is you don't have data available. You know you need to model that area of risk or uncertainty, but all you have information-wise is 3 points, something like a min, a max, and most likely. And that's where we're at today. I thought about putting some slides together, and if I did, they would have looked like the traditional kind of academic view of a PDF and CDF formula, and here it is, no doubt about it. But I'm going to show you other ways to get to it. Instead of burying ourselves in PowerPoint slides, I want to jump right in to Excel with at-risk added in and show you how to work with at-risk. Okay, I'm going to hide a few things first of all. Should have done this before I brought them up. Here's the situation. Let's imagine that you're working on the cost estimate with a pretty intense software development effort. So the numbers that I'm representing here for low, most likely, and high, 800, 1,000, 1,600, imagine those being equivalent source lines of code in thousands. So 800,000, 1 million, 1.6 million as the 3-point inputs for a software development effort. All right. What I haven't done here, and this is where we start to run into some issues we're going to have with this whole approach, by calling this a low and by calling this a high, I've not been very specific. A better way to have done that would have been to ask for it as a low percentage, meaning, is there a chance of being below that? And then ask for the high as a high percentage. But in the straight 3-point approach, you're asking for min, max, most likely, low, high, most likely, maybe optimistic, pessimistic, best case, worst case. There's many different ways to have asked for these. But in all those, there is the opportunity for bias and misinterpretation. I'll address that as we get further into it, but let's take them straight as an 800, 1,000, and a 1,600 here. And the simple thing to do in at risk is, and I'll show you from a blank cell, would be to go in and define the distribution. Now notice that there's this at-risk ribbon at the top. It's a nice red and blue. I'm showing at-risk professional 8.0, which just came out in February. So for those of you that are at-risk users, if the ribbon I'm showing is a little different than what you're used to, you need to upgrade. The arrangement of this ribbon is considerably different than previous ones. It's very user-friendly, very logical, left to right kind of layout, the way you would build a model. You define your distributions, you set up the simulation, you run it, and you interpret the results. Left to right, kind of how you would work it. So the guts of what's going on here, the Monte Carlo in the background, the distribution, the equations and things like that, haven't really changed between editions, but the dialog boxes and this menu layout is a little bit different. So I'm working with a version called 8.0, just out in February. What I would do traditionally here would be to go to the distribution button, define distribution, and pull that up. And like other packages, it's going to present us a number of different ways of filtering down, necking down to the choice we want to make. If I really haven't a clue about what I want to use or want to see the whole section, there are 80-some different distributions thrown in together when you consider the continuous and discrete and some that take alternate parameters. So I can do a little bit better than that. I can filter down to just the continuous ones. And if I come down to triangular, this is a little new for this dialog box. It gives us a real brief interpretation of when you might use the triangular. It tells us it's for continuous variables. It is a bounded distribution, meaning that neither the min or the max shoot off to positive or negative infinity. So that it has an absolute bound at both the lower and the upper end. It says it's used for rough 3-point estimation, which is what we're doing. Modeling expert opinion and project management cost analysis are frequent areas of application for this. Sounds like exactly what we need to do. So if I were to choose this one now, which with it highlighted can just say select distribution, it gives me this dialog box that I now, of course, need to tell it what to work with for a min, a max, and a most likely. So click on the min, tell it it's 800 there, give it the cell address, click on the most likely, cell address is here, click on the maximum, give it that cell address. And what you're looking at now is an updated graph of this exact triangular distribution. It has a minimum of 800, a most likely, which is the mode, of 1,000, and a maximum of 1,600. You can see that it defaults to present the 5 and 95%, but I can move these around to wherever I want. I can go in and type that to be a 10% if you were interested. So at risk lets you move them there. It lets you change the values they're called handles. It lets you change these to go to wherever you want. Okay, so I can see that there's 1.6% chance in this specified triangular distribution of being at or below 850. I can come over here to the 1450. I make that a 1450 and it tells me 4.7%. Or if I'm curious about what's at the 10th percent, with 10% in the upper tail, change that to 10%, and since we've specified it that way, we will be working with it. It says 1,381, 1.38 million. ESLOC is where the 90th percent, which leaves 10% in the tail. You also get along the right-hand side a lot of the characteristics of this distribution. It's min, max, mean, mode, etc. And you can see a breakout in starting here in every 10%. And periodically it'll jump into the 5% range. So it breaks out the probability that is exactly what the graph would have showed you. It's just all in table format there. Once you're happy with this layout, including name, and that's an opportunity to change it, I could either type a new name in there or use a cell reference. It is guessing I want to call this one at risk because it found some text above the cell I'm working in that says at risk. If you're okay with that, and once you're happy, just say okay. And what it shows by default is the expected value of that distribution. So everything I've just showed you is exactly what's in the cell above it. I wanted you to see live how to do that. I also took advantage of the feature that says let's name it something besides at risk, and I chose the distribution name I have in the cell off to the side. So that is a straight triangular distribution. Here it is, just to show you. The 800, the 1000, and the 1.6 or 1600 are its three input values. We're looking at the mean, the expected value right now. Mine painted blue, kind of this light blue color automatically, because in my at-risk models, I've gone with preferences for colors in the cells, that anything I tell it is an input distribution, it's going to make that light blue color. Anything I specify as an output distribution, it's going to paint this kind of greenish color. And then I'm using this tan, I guess it's called, for statistics functions. And my version of at-risk also does optimization. If I was doing that, it has that kind of a magenta-ish color. But that'll help me later if I needed to locate these cells that I've made each of those four types of at-risk cell. Okay, which is, I brought that up to show you that I've got something going on in these cells over here, and this is a nice feature in at-risk. There are many, many, many different statistics functions available that will let me either base what it's displaying on the theoretical value out of that distribution. In other words, this triangular, I'm asking for its mean, its standard deviation, its min, max, and its skew value. In this case, it's a positive 0.42, so it's got a right skew to it. The way to introduce those in at-risk is to come up to the function button, and there's a lot going on in here. This is an alternate way of getting to all the distributions. Right now you can see in one display all the continuous. Here are all the discrete. Here are the ones that have alt parameters. Here are the ones that have alt parameter D for descending cumulative, if that's the one the way you want to specify it. And then there's a set of special distributions as well. What I'm using are out of this section down here. And specifically, I've used this, it looks like about a dozen and a half or so theoretical statistic functions to go in and identify what the theoretical mean, min, mode, all these values are, including I can give it a percentile. It'll tell me what the value is at that cumulative probability, or I could give it a specific value and it would tell me the cumulative probability, either way, vice versa. So I've pulled these 5 in so we can compare what we'll be doing the rest of this webinar. Some people have used the ones for simulation result and found these quite useful. Look at all the different versions of functions that are available to me after a simulation is run to go in and pull out the characteristics of, typically you'd want these for the output value, whatever cell or cells you're using as the outputs from your simulation. You can ask for all of these things to be calculated. And in fact, what a lot of people do with these is kind of customize an output report if they're not happy with the standard ones that are done. So a lot of different functions available. And that's probably enough for right now on that. So the other thing I want to show while I'm here is with the at-risk ribbon, I can come up to this single die and click on that, and it's a toggle between random and static. I just changed it. You see that the die is lit up here, and hopefully everybody can see it, but if not, let me point it out a little bit better than that with a cool little arrow. Boom, boom, draw as best I can freehand. That arrow right there is pointing to that die. When it's lit up, what you're looking at in the input cells are randomly sampled values. So if I were to hit function F9 on my laptop, F9 for some of you, but function F9 for me, I'm cycling between, I got to get it going. I'm cycling between iterations or random samples from that triangular distribution. So I'm hitting F9, 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 F9. Every one of those is a new random sample from that triangular distribution. When I take the die back off, I'm back to the mean, and you can see that I've pulled the theoretical mean in to demonstrate that that's what you're looking at. There are a couple of different settings you can go to. Probably the most useful one in the default is for inputs to show their mean. This is the way I know, because I worked in the cost estimating field for 25 or so years until about a year ago. Unless things have changed dramatically in the last year, the triangular distribution is a very familiar distribution to the cost estimating community. And some of you may stop there and go, okay, I got it. 800, 1,000, 1,600, call it triangular. I can come up with all the statistical characteristics, but there it is. One of the purposes I want to use this webinar for is to show you that you don't have to stop there, that and you don't even need at risk to do what I'm about to show you, but it's made very easy in at risk. I've got a number of different ways of presenting this, and I'm going to talk you through each of them. And as we're doing it, I want to talk about the conditions under which you may want to go with one or the other. So, and I've already done a lot of this work in advance. The first one I want to talk about is the other quick one to use, called the Pert distribution. And it's actually an acronym. It stands for Program Evaluation Review Technique, Pert. It's very common in the schedule risk analysis community. In fact, there's a whole technique for doing schedule risk deterministically called Pert that takes advantage of those same three inputs. And that's why you don't see anything else here. The same 800, 1,000, and 1,600 modeled as a Pert distribution, which is an approximation to the beta distribution, has a different mean. So there's something a little bit going on. And the way to get to it, I'll pull up the distribution. Here's what it looks like by itself. And it is pulling in the same three values, B4, D4, F4 in this case, so the same 800, 1,000, 1,600. You look at the graph, and it's not triangular. Like, even though we're using the same three inputs, our graph in this case is more rounded. In fact, I love this feature about at-risk. I can do an overlay real quick to show you the difference between the Pert we just chose and the triangular I demonstrated a moment ago. Okay, the red is the triangular, the blue is the Pert. If I open this up a little bit more, where you can see some of the characteristics off to the side, come on. I'll just make it bigger so we can see it all. Right, see the Pert in blue, the triangular in red. You can see that the min, the max, the most likely, or the mode, are all the same. You can see that graphically here at this 800 is where its lower point is for both. You can see that at 1,600, the blue stops as well as the red. And you can see that the peak of both distributions, the mode, the most likely, is at 1,000 for each. What's different, and these both have to have areas of 1 for them to be valid probability distributions, and that's kind of why they have the different shape they do. The two things to really key in on here that account for the difference between the two distributions, because this is not symmetric, it's a right skewed distribution, the right tail in the Pert has a lot of probability taken away from it. In other words, it doesn't drop off from the mean in a linear fashion like the triangular does, which the way to think about that is you're not placing as much probability in the upper tail. You have a flatter tail compared to the triangular distribution's fat tail. And how I would think of that is, to go with the Pert, you would really be telling the expert, thank you for giving me that 1.6 million. I'm not going to exaggerate the chances of that happening. I'm going to use a flatter tail here to drop off to that 1,600. So there's a lot less. In fact, you can see there's a 5% chance of being above 1326 with the Pert. Compared to the triangular has a 15.6, so more than 3 times the amount of probability is packed into the triangular distribution's upper tail in this case because of its strong right skew. So the amount of probability that makes that difference right there between 1600 and it looks like somewhere around maybe 1170, 1180, somewhere in that neighborhood, that difference right there between the blue and the red is how the rest of this distribution got so much probability packed around the most likely. Okay, the red has more probability in the upper tail, but less probability around the most likely. So the blue got its probability from what it isn't applying out here in this upper tail. They both have to have an area of total probability of 1.0. So there's another kind of interpretation that goes along with that. If I'm going to a subject matter expert for this and they say, you know, I really think we're going to be around 1 million lines of code, and you treat that as a triangular distribution, most likely, you're dropping off quickly from that most likely. You're not putting a lot of probability in the neighborhood of the most likely. If you've gone with the PERT, you have more probability in that neighborhood. So in a way, you think of it as telling the expert, I hear you, I believe that you've thought a lot about this, and so I'm going to pack more probability around the most likely. And I hope I explained that well, because to me, this is really a fundamental difference between the two distributions. Choosing the PERT over the triangular tells the expert, I believe you, I'm going to put more probability around the most likely, and I'm also not going to exaggerate one or potentially both tails, depending on whether it's skewed one way or the other, or even symmetric. Okay? So that's the biggest difference. And if you've never been exposed to the PERT before, I really would encourage you to look a little bit more into it. Okay, so I'll shrink that back down. And where we are right now then is at the point where you've only seen two. You've seen a straight triangular, you've seen a straight PERT distribution. And so your consideration between those two is going to involve the differences between these characteristics and maybe more. There's more of a skew to the PERT, same min max most likely, but standard deviation smaller with the PERT, and so you've seen some of the other things that follow through. The next thing that kind of comes up gets back to how I asked for the information. I intentionally labeled this as low and high for these two columns. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that that isn't necessarily how you've been taught to ask them for them. Maybe you've asked for a min and a max. Maybe you asked for best case, worst case, maybe optimistic, pessimistic, or low, high, like I'm demonstrating here. None of those are explicit enough to walk away from an interview session and know for sure that you've been given the absolute minimum and the absolute maximum, which is what I've treated them as with these first two distributions that I defined. Okay? I can't make that point enough. If all you've done is either live or by email somehow asked for the 3-point estimates and haven't been specific enough about what you meant by low and high, min and max even, optimistic, pessimistic, best case, worst case, then you really, when you're done and ready to go to work, you come back to your office or cube and you sit down to model it and you go, wait a minute, I asked for a low here, but I really did their answer mean it'll never be lower than that? Or was there a chance it could be lower or higher? That thought process gets us into the next set of distributions we're going to talk about, which is you coming back and either yourself or having asked it in a way where you've been a little more explicit about what you mean by that low point and that high point. And I'm demonstrating here, and I did it on purpose, a 5 and a 90, meaning that 800, what if the expert's interpretation of that was, I think there's about a 5% chance that we could see something 800 or less for lines of code. And at the 1600 level, their interpretation of that was, instead of going out all the way to an absolute extreme, they've said, you know, there's about a 10% chance of us being at or above 1600 or 1.6 million. Okay. So they didn't need to be 5 and 90. At risk will let you change these to 0 and 85 or 10 and 90, which is a common triangular called the trigen, 1090 trigen. But I wanted to demonstrate that they don't have to be symmetric. Okay, so I've imagined that when I pinned down the expert here and said, okay, you told me 800 was kind of the low number you had. Is there a chance that we could be below that? And they said, sure, about 5%. Is there a chance we could be above 1600? Yeah, about 10%. That's the cumulative probability of 90 then associated with that. In at-risk speak, there are two different ways of taking that same information and turning them into a generalized triangular distribution. I'll start with the one that you, as cost estimators, are probably more familiar with, called a tri-gen. In fact, it's very, very traditional in cost circles to take those pieces of information, the 800, 1000, 1600, go back to your cube and go, let's just call it a 1090 because there's probably bias in their answers, without really clearing that with the expert. I would encourage you to do that, but whatever these are going to be, 590, 1090, 095, whatever they are, in at-risk, the mechanics of specifying the distribution are to go to define distribution again and find the one called tri-gen. And then I've used cell addresses to specify. I needed every one of these 5 now to specify, including what percentage to treat the bottom and the top at. So it's using bottom and top instead of low, high, min, max. And I've also, you can see I used a cell address to pull in the title tri-gen, and that's how it knows to label it that way. Here we are updated with information about the characteristics of this particular triangular distribution. Say, okay, you see that the mean is now greater than it was for the straight triangular, 1200.3 now. Instead of that, you can see that the skew is 0.4 instead of 0.42. You can see that the maximum had to be kicked all the way up to 1952.4, just a little under 2 million lines of code to give us a situation where 10% of the distribution is above 1600. And I'll show you that again in the graph. So if I toggle this down to, the quickest way to do it is just to make that 10%. If I leave 10% in the upper tail, you see that it needs from 1600 up all the way to this 1952.36 to give me a tail with 10% in there. So that's what at-risk had to do, was calculate a new min and a new max in order to work with 5 and 90% at the lower tail and the upper. So the 800 and 1600 that we were calling low and high are actually points where there's 5%, there's the 5 right there, 5% below it, coming all the way down to a min of 648.67, and 10% above the 1600 had to go all the way out there. Now, if you've never worked with the 1090 tri-gen before, this may baffle you. And I think to make it clear, notice that it is not, I'll say it again, it is not simply taking the old max or high of 1600 and taking 10% of that, which would be 160, added to 1600 would be 1760. That's not the right way to do it, okay? You don't take 10% more than the value of this, you recreate the distribution with the same most likely, so that at that new upper point, there's 10% in the tail past the original value for the high here. Okay? And this is a graph showing it, and I'll show you the overlay again, this time using the original triangle to make the point. Come in here, go to the cell with the original triangle. And now you can see in red, the original triangle, in blue, the effect of doing this 590, in our case, tri-gen approach. All right. How about now, Chelsea? Any questions yet?
It says, what are your thoughts on the practice common in the DoD to assume the low estimate is at the 15th percentile and the high estimate is at the 85th percentile if the percentiles are not explicitly stated?
I'm going to hold off on an answer to that because I have, and I know exactly where that question's coming from. It's it might be coming out of the DAU classes or the Air Force's uncertainty guide. I've got an approach to that I'm going to call tri-garb that I absolutely will get to, and this is what it's going to look like. But I don't like that approach. The short answer is I don't like that approach, and I'll show you a better one shortly. Very good question, though, Dakota. Was that the only one so far?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've seen the straight triangular and a generalized version that allows us to pick the percentage to add below the min and above the max. And we've seen a PERT There is no Pert Gen per se that works the way the Tri-Gen does, but at-risk gives us both an alternate way of specifying the triangular and an alternate way of specifying the Pert. So let's look at those next. These are, and I'll start here because it really is, you can see the means are the same, 1200.3, 1200.3 for the one we just did. Well, of course they are. They've got the same pieces of information. So it's just an alternate way of specifying it. The input looks a little bit different, but we've gone to triangular, the alt version of the triangular. Notice it says alternate here for parameters. We've given it the cell addresses again. Notice in the dialog boxes it says 5 and 90%. Well, the way to get them to say that was to go into here and configure the alternate parameters. So this is a key feature of this dialog box. It probably defaulted to 1090 or 595. I needed to go in and tell it that the minimum I want treated at the 5%. I wish it let me put a cell address there, but it doesn't. So I had to type in the 5. I had to type in the 90 for the max. And then I had to unselect most likely so that it wasn't trying to treat it at some set cumulative probability. Calling it most likely, click on percentile and making it 50% wouldn't be correct because I asked for it as a most likely, not the median. All right, very key. If I had put this specified it to be at the 50th percent, it would have found a distribution that made that the median as opposed to the most likely. In general, you don't know what the most likely's cumulative probability is. So this kind of arrangement for the alt distributions, when you've asked for a most likely, is the right way to go, at least with the way at-risk works. So that's kind of the standard setup. I want a 5 and a 90, so I put 590 in there. Percentile for the min and the max, no percentile, no cumulative probability for most likely. And when I say okay, then I get this triangular, and you see off to the side the same kind of information for this distribution. And I've also asked for these 5 statistics from the theoretical distribution, just so you can go in and see the differences instead of having them all together. It is exactly the same though as that 590 Tri-Gen would have been. No difference, just a different way of specifying it. For the Pert alt, same kind of arrangement. I would have gone in, defined the distribution here, and you see it labeled as Pert alt. You see it is also set up to ask for 5 and 90 because I told it that's what I planned on giving it with these alternate parameters. Right there, 5 and 90 again, most likely is not pinned down to a set cumulative probability. I've given it the cell addresses or what I wanted to be treated at the 5 and the 90 as well as the most likely. And I've used a cell address for the name. That's why it says Pert alt above the graph. Let's just, for a matter of comparison here, overlay the standard Pert, the Pert we would have gotten before we treated the 3 inputs at the 5 and the 90th. So I'm going to go in here and give it a cell address for my original Pert input, which was right there. And you see in red and blue the 2 different distributions, the blue being the one we just fit, the red being the original. So you can see that in order to get to the 10% tail, it had to, and this is remarkable actually, this is quite probably something you want to be aware of and maybe would give you kind of a pause here. There's the 1600 in blue in order to get 10% in the upper tail. But because that upper tail is flat, notice that the maximum for it had to kick all the way out to, wait for it, had to kick all the way out to 2.4 million, a little above 2.4 million lines of code. To get 10% in that upper tail for the Pert alt, I needed to work with a Pert that had a 2.4 all the way out here. Really, you can't see it, but it extends all the way out there. That's what its maximum would be. If I did a sanity check with these values, went back to the expert that I'd gotten the original 3 inputs from, they probably would balk at that upper limit and go, holy cow, no way we're going to be that large. So, and you want that kind of interaction between you and the expert that's giving you this information. If you didn't clear that with them first, this is one of those cases where you'd kind of be the doctor Dr. Fauci in the COVID-19 case, where you're up there giving a briefing and you say something and you can tell by the rest of the people in the background, or maybe that software engineer raises his hand and said, where did you get that number? I didn't give that to you. So this is definitely one of those numbers you'd have to get clearance on. But that's how the PERT alt works. If you have the same three pieces of information, the 800, the 1000, the 1600, and decide that 1600 is only really at the 90th cumulative probability, then you are looking for a tail of 10% pass there. With the PERT distribution, for a right skewed version of it, it's going to have to find a very large maximum in order to give you that 10%. So what are you learning in all of this? Yeah, at risk gives you the mechanics, a lot of really cool graphs and charts and statistics and pretty informative dialog boxes. There is always going to be judgment left in how you do this. And for a lot of people, that's not very comfortable. I think the overlay feature in at risk gives you a powerful way of yourself understanding what it is the issues are going to be between different distribution choices, as well as sharing that with an expert if you've got that kind of relationship with them. So really nice feature. All right, so you've seen all 5 of those. You see the difference over here. And if we stopped right there, to go back to Dakota's question, you wouldn't be quite complying with the Air Force's guidance from their cost uncertainty manual. I'm very familiar with that. In fact, if you've seen the I forget the acronym now they use for it, but the current DoD cost and schedule risk and uncertainty handbook. If you look in the forewords of that, you'll see my name. I was part of the team that wrote that manual, so I know exactly what Dakota's asking. And the basis for it was the original cost uncertainty manual that the Air Force did. So if I'm wrong, if this isn't answering your question, Dakota, please come back in and ask me. Ask it a little differently, but I believe what you're really saying is the guidance that uncertainty handbook gives says treat that low and the high, whatever you're calling them, min, max, low, high, optimistic, pessimistic, treat those as capturing a certain amount of the area. Now that's a little different than your question asked. Your question said specifically 15 and 85%. That's not quite how that manual is written. It says, and I'll quote it as best I can, pretty closely to the way I remember it says, thou shalt, almost like a Bible, thou shalt ask for and interpret the results as capturing 70%. And that 70% leaves 30% unaccounted for, which some people might then think it's going to be at the 15th and the 85th. Because 15 below, 15 above accounts for that missing 30%. That's not quite what it means. But what the uncertainty handbook that the Air Force put together doesn't do for you, mathematically it doesn't do it. It just says in words, find new endpoints so that you maintain the skew of the original distribution. So here's, and some of you know my name and know where I used to work, and I'm not going to hide it. It was at NavAir, the cost department for NavAir. I put this together and I'm making it available to you. I'm going to shoot this to Megan and she'll forward this on to the people who've signed up for this webinar. But I went into Paul Garvey's book. The title of the book is Probability Methods for Cost Uncertainty Analysis and Systems Engineering Perspective. Very, very good, but pretty mathematically intense book. Thank God Dr. Garvey had already done the work on this, because I was able to then go in and, just like the graph can be helpful to you if you follow along with the color scheme and follow along with the labeling of it. It says the same kind of thing we did on the earlier sheet. It says I've got an 800, a 1000, and a 1600, the same 3 inputs. And I'm going to, instead of the Air Force saying 70%, I wanted to make this a variable value, so you don't always have to work with 70. So I put 0.85 in there, in other words, 85%. Here's how you interpret that. That means that between the original low and the original high, the 2 yellow A prime and B prime values, what's in yellow there captures 85% of the distribution. So the question at this point is, what do we do to get the other 15%? Do we just divide it in half and put half below and half above the old low and high? And that's kind of the way Dakota, I think, has been taught to do it. The Air Force didn't say to do that. The Air Force's guidance said, find a new minimum, call it just A, find a new maximum B, so that the original skew is maintained for this triangle. Now that's something you got to kind of think about carefully to get your brain around. But what it has to do to solve for that missing 15% is find a minimum, find a maximum, so that these two new areas add to 15%, and do it in a way that the skew between, if we had a triangle drawn from A prime up to there and down to B prime, so that that skew is exactly the same as the skew with these new ones. And here's the math to do that. Is you see it in the formula bar. I know I can't make the formula bar any larger, even if I plus this up, but you see that it solves for a new min, solves for a new max. You see that instead of dividing that 15% evenly, it puts 3.8% in the lower tail and 11.3% in the upper tail. Those two together added to the 15% that was missing. There's the new mean, there's the new variance, there's the coefficient of variation. And the important thing for at-risk users is it grabs the right values to use this as a new triangular distribution. And that's all. It's not a, it's at-risk doesn't know what a trigarv is. I named it that probably 10, 12 years ago to give props to Dr. Garvey. So trigarv, if you ever hear people talk about that, and you will, because I've shared this spreadsheet with DAU, I've shared it with a lot of places that I traveled as a cost department from NavAir, other syscoms, let me put it that way, have seen this. So anybody who says trigarv is referencing this kind of a work and thought process. In at-risk speak, it is really, and I'll light it up so you can see, it's just pulling in the original most likely and the updated minimum and maximum. So the A, the new A, the original most likely, and the new B, those three values become the three parameters input to a straight, regular old triangular distribution. Now, let me go back, and I've pulled in the right values over here so I can compare these for you. Let's go into the trigarv. Here's what we started with. This was the original triangular where I've done nothing, okay? I'm going to try to get it to overlay, do an overlay with a cell from the other sheet. Shouldn't be an issue. Click on trigarv and grab this one, say okay. Must choose it on the active sheet. Oh well, it didn't like me doing it that way. So here's what I'll do instead. Right below here, I know what to choose, so I'll define the distribution as being triangular. Look at all these distributions. Select it, and I'm going to go to the new min, which is off on this page. Oh well, it's not letting me do all of that. I wanted to be a little cute about it. I can show you from here. Let's do it this way. I'll define the triangular here. Recent, where's recent? Triangular right at the top of the list. And I've got the same information here, so I'm just gonna pull them in this way. Here's my minimum, originally was 800. My most likely originally was the 1,000. My maximum was the 1,600. So there's the straight triangular, and I've got it on the same sheet now. That's what at-risk didn't like before. And say okay. So the comparison between these, an overlay, here it was in blue as the original, and an overlay to the new version of this based on the trigarv kind of approach is right there. Still triangular. See the red and the blue being the original one, the red being the modified one. And the important thing to notice here is at the 1,600 value, with the blue, we've got nothing above that originally, but we have 11.2% above it is what trigarv had to do. And in order to do that, it had to give us a maximum of, and we're looking at the red ones, then a little bit under 2 million is what the maximum needs to become. With the trigarv, down here, we had at a value of 800 was the original minimum. You see that in blue, the original triangular, there's nothing below it, nothing above it. But with the trigarv, which is the red, 3.8% and 11.2, and sure enough, those two tails add up to 15%. So what the trigarv has done, and let's see if we can compare. Here's the proof in the pudding. Look at the skewness here. Hopefully that's large enough to see. But for both triangular distributions, the original one and the trigarv, they both have a 0.42 skewness. And that was how Dr. Garvey developed the math to solve for the new max and the new min, was to find the missing probability, that 15%, split it in a way that the skewness is maintained. So why is that important? I mean, we ought to talk about that. And this is kind of at the heart of Dakota's question. Is it important? Is it important to know that 15% of the distribution wasn't present the way you were given the values from the expert? Sure, that's important to know. Should you automatically expect that the expert can tell you and how to split up that missing 15%? Or maybe is it more important just to try and get into their brain and get a sense of which way the dominance, if you will, of one way high versus low occurs? And that's what the skewness represents. Compared to where the mean is in this case, and the most likely is what we're focusing on here, it's giving us a calculated value for a skew that for both of these distributions is the same. And in an expert's mind, skewness kind of represents that most likely is my best guess. It could be below this, it could be above it. Boom, you've captured the skew, and that's what the blue triangle shows here. So if they then turn around and say, but you know what, I'm only accounting for 85% of what could happen, your job as the analyst is to solve for that missing 15%. And to do that and to specify it as a triangle, you need to solve for a new min, a new max, in such a way that the skewness is maintained. That's what Dr. Garvey's math has done for us. The equations to do it, I mean, when you see them in this form, they're not very hard. I imagine that they took a little bit, it's just algebra. I mean, this is the geometric shape itself and then the algebra involved to get this, force the skewness to be the same. And that's how it's implemented. But I'm grateful that Dr. Garvey put it in a book so I could do it and didn't have to come up with those equations myself. And so I named it trigarv. You're not going to see it labeled that way in any manuals. You're not going to see it in any software. But I felt like I owed it to the good doctor to do that. All right, any questions right now, Chelsea?
We have a question from Daniel. He doesn't have a mic, unfortunately. He asked, what does trigen stand for?
The gen in trigen is generalized. So it's just a way of generalizing the triangular distribution. So all of these distributions, triangular and Pert, start from the 3 inputs. The generalized version of it says you want to do something other than treat the min or the low at an absolute value and then treat the high as an absolute. You want to treat those as some other percentage on the cumulative probability. So the gen is generalized. The alt is alternate and the garv is Garvey. But like I said a moment ago, I'm going to send this spreadsheet to Megan, and she'll forward it either to everybody who participated or everybody who signed up. I'm not sure which way she's going to go, but if you're listening now, you'll get a copy of this thing and all the formulas. Unfortunately, if you don't have at risk, what's in blue here will just show up as a pound value for you. But that brings me to another point, and we've got a few minutes left, but I wanted to show you, and back into the PowerPoint, which will also be made available to you, that, and this is the paid political announcement kind of thing, if you've got questions about what at-risk's capabilities are, if you go to the website I'm showing you here, Control-click will get us there. Then takes you right to the website and right where you can sign up for it's either 10 or I think it's a 15-day trial version. And when you get to there, notice that it's going to give you the at-risk industrial edition of that's what I was demonstrating, was this version right here. Palisade has a complete decision tool suite, though, which you could download. At-risk is one of the modules of that suite, but they also have a stats package associated with it. There's a decision analysis tool. There is an optimization tool. There is a neural networks tool, and one that does sensitivity analysis as well. So you may be interested in the full suite. You'll get to at-risk also by having this full suite, or you can just cut to the chase and just go to this version. But either of those is free to sign up for it, and it's a 10 or a 15-day version. Okay, so I would encourage you to do that. The other thing I would say is if you have specific questions about what it costs and things like that, here's the address to use, sales@palisade.com. And as a last kind of announcement, I hope what I've given you has whet your appetite a bit for choosing input distributions. If you just joined us for this one, you have not seen the first part, which was at-risk goodness, a fit feature. I know that ICEA has made that available to you. You can go and locate it on their website and watch that if you want to see what at-risk does for goodness of fit with continuous univariate data. But I also would encourage you to come back in a couple weeks, Thursday, the 13th of August, for something I don't think you would have seen before if you've never had me as an instructor, because I'm probably the only person out there that's teaching this particular subject the way it's done. It's how to use at-risk with a very specific way of interviewing experts, taking your question, their answers, and using a feature within at-risk to give you a defensible way of saying, I chose this distribution from our interview session because fill in the blank. It's not the same as goodness of fit test. This is actually using root mean squared error, which I'll explain on the 13th, but I hope you come back for that. And as long as we're here, and as long as we've got another minute or so, another thing I wanted to show you about at-risk is at the at-risk website. Even if you don't have the software, you can go into training and events. You can click on live or on-demand webinars. And on-demand webinars is Palisade's recorded versions of every webinar that's ever been given. Okay, and you can filter down on these by recent ones or the ones listed there. You can go by level, beginner, intermediate, expert. You can go by product, which is going to be at risk, and the other tools. You can go by application. And notice that risk registers, risk analysis, cost estimation, cost risk. Here we go, cost estimation, for example, introduction to risk, project cost estimation with risk registers, intro to cost estimation using at risk. Okay, so 3, it picked up pretty quickly. Distributions, boom. Which distribution should I choose? Okay, a whole lot, and here's me. These are actually me doing the first 2 that I did for ICEA, but I tailored them a little bit more to cost estimating there. So a whole bunch of things. And what was support? Under support, and once again, you don't have to have a license to do this. There's a tremendous knowledge base. There are models available to you to go in and look the same kind of breakout. If you want to see it by industry, defense and aerospace industry, Air Force Missile Cost Series, 3 different models presented there. You want to see it by features, probably copulus, goal seek, all kinds of distribution fitting. Here we go. You can go in there and you can see some distribution. So I really would encourage you, if you haven't used at-risk before, to go to the website that I gave you to get a trial version and to poke around in the training and some of the support features available to you. Unless there's more questions, Chelsea, I'm going to turn it over to you.
We do have someone with their hand raised, Zachary. I'm going to unmute you if you have a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so Paul Garvey's approach maintained the skewness and the kurtosis of the distribution and just shifted the tails out. What's the difference between that and trying alt and trigen?
Good question. And that's as clearly as I can make it. Notice that when we did the triang-alt and the trigen, I'm showing my spreadsheet again, that we had to tell it what to do with that missing 15%. I had to tell it, treat the 800 at the 5%, treat the 1600 at the 90th percent. So 10% past there, 5% below there, that's that 15% that was missing. With the triang-alt and the trigen, I have to give it that probability. Cumulative probability is really what they are, 5% and 90%. With the tri-garv approach, all I gave it was the 0.85, which is 85%. So I've said that between the 800 and the 1600, all I know is that 85% of the distribution is between those two. I didn't tell it how much to give there and how much to give there. That's what it solved for. It solved for that being 3.8% and this being, and the upper being 11.3. Taken together, those two add back up to the 15% that was missing. And it solved for a new min and a new max to do that. So if that's still not clear, as simply as I can say it, if you're using triang-alt or trigen, you are telling it what to do, how much to put below the low and above the high. You are telling it how to interpret 800 and 1600. With the tri-garv, all that's being solved for because you've said, do it in a way where 85% of the distribution is between the original min and max, but you, garv, in those calculations, find a new min, find a new max, and tell me what that probability has to be to account for the missing 15%. All right? There's no way in the world I would have found an expert, first of all, that could say, yeah, 800 is at the 3.8% and 1600 is at the 11.3%. You know, they're going to give me a nice round number like we treated back here, 5 and 90. But between 800 and 1600, since I'm missing 5% there, missing 10% there, it's 15% missing. So the thing that those two approaches have in common are these three original inputs and the fact that I'm saying there's 85% between 800 and 1600. This approach on this sheet, you must tell it how to break out the missing 15%. This approach, it solves for that, but it does it in a way that keeps the original skew. Was that 3-4 long answers? Hopefully one of those.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And we also have another question from Mitch. I'm going to unmute you right now.
Hi, Mitch.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, yes. Okay. Is there a analogous Garvey distribution for the PERT?
You know, not that I'm aware of. It's not in his book, and it probably could be solved for pretty quickly by somebody who's got a little more time on their hands than I probably do. Maybe even somebody who's a little more mathematically elegant than me. I wish there was. Maybe there is, but it's not in his book, and I've not taken the time to solve for it. Are you looking for a thesis topic?
No.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
You know, I think I'm going to finally break down and write Dr. Garvey an email and ask him to do that for his next book.
I was going to say, that sounds like an opportunity for you to partner with Dr. Garvey.
It does. It sure does. The other thing, I've never even told him that I named this distribution after him, and yet there's probably 1,000 people that over the years I've exposed to this technique. You know, there's over 1,000 now that I've exposed to this. So people run around calling her the dry garv. Most of them have even forgotten what the garv stands for. If Dr. Garvey still gives the ICEA workshop training portion on cost, risk, and uncertainty, I can see somebody in the room going, have you ever used the tri-garv distribution?
Tell me more about this.
And he would say, never even heard of it. But I didn't feel right using his book to get these equations without giving him some kind of credit for it. So I named it after him and then never told him about it.
It's a perfect homage. With it being 11:01, we'll wrap things up, but great interaction and great participation today. If you guys need to get in touch with Steve, you can always email the ICEA business office and we'll patch you through. You can also, I'm sure, reach out to him via those Palisade links that he showed just earlier, or at least asked to be forwarded to him. And I think, unless you have anything else to add, Steve?
Come back on the 13th, please. 13th of August.
Attaboy. Excellent. So then we'll hear from all of you on the 13th. Until then, be safe, be good, be sane, be healthy, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.